Hey, writer, ready to take your fiction to the next level? Whether you've just got a great idea or you're already stuck in the murky middle of writing your book, the Wicked Good Fiction Bootcamp I designed just for you. This 8-week self paced online course gives you the tools, the guidance, and the support you need to get to the end of your book and know that it is wicked good. Head to suzyvidori.com/bootcamp or follow the link in the show notes for more information and get started today. I'll see you inside where I'll be there to support you as you comment and share your work throughout the course. Welcome to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Suzy Vidori, where I teach you the tried and true secrets to writing fiction, nonfiction that are going to wow your readers, broken down step by step. We're going to explore writing techniques. I'm going to show you a glimpse behind the scenes of successful writers' careers that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. And I'm also going to coach writers live on their pages so that you can learn and transform your own storytelling. Whether you're just starting out, you're drafting your first book, you're editing, or you're currently rewriting that book, or maybe even your 10th book, this show's going to help you unlock the writing skills that you didn't even know you needed, but you definitely do. I'm so looking forward to helping you get your amazing ideas from your mind onto your pages in an exciting way for both you and your readers so that you can achieve your wildest writing dreams. And you're going to also have some fun doing it. Let's dive in. On today's podcast, I am hosting Lidija Hilje. This has been such a long time coming. I'm so proud of the book that she has put out. Lidija is a fellow book coach. She lives in Croatia, and she and I started our book coaching careers together. She's somebody that I absolutely adore, and just her knowledge and her grasp of how story works is something that we could talk all day about. And in fact, we almost did. And so this episode ran really long, and we're going to break it into two parts because she just has so much to say. But here's her bio. Lidija is a book coach and author of literary fiction. And before becoming a novelist, she was a practicing attorney at law, spending her days trying cases before Croatian courts. Lidija's nonfiction essays have been handpicked by Medium's editorial team and featured on the Medium homepage, which earned her the title of top writer in fields of psychology, self-awareness, personal development, self-improvement, and more. Most recently, her personal essay was published in the New York Times' Modern Love column. She lives in Zadar, Croatia, with her husband and 2 children. And when she's not writing or coaching writers, she can be found sipping coffee with her husband on one of her hometown's piazzas, or scrapbooking and buying too many books with her girls. Lidija's debut novel, Slanting Towards the Sea, just came out in July of 2025 with Simon & Schuster. It's being released in both the UK and North America. Let me read you the blurb about it. This is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous novel, and we're going to talk about it. Slanting Towards the Sea. Spanning across 20 years and one life-altering summer in Croatia, Slanting Towards the Sea is at once an unforgettable love story and a powerful exploration of what it means to come of age in a country younger than oneself. Ivona divorced the love of her life, Vlaho, a decade ago. They met as students at the turn of the millennium, when newly democratic Croatia was alive with hope and promise. But the challenges of living in a burgeoning country extinguished Ivonia's dreams, one after another, and a devastating secret forced her to set him free. Now Vlaho is remarried and a proud father of 2, while Ivona's life has taken a downward turn. In her 30s, she has returned to her childhood home to care for her ailing father. Bewildered by life's disappointments, she finds solace in reconnecting with Vlaho and is welcomed into his family with his spirited new wife, Marina. But when a new man enters Ivona's life, the carefully cultivated dynamic between the three is disrupted, forcing a reckoning for all involved. Set against the mesmerizing Croatian coastline, Slanting Towards the Sea is a cinematic, emotionally searing debut about the fragile nature of potential and the transcendence of love. In this part 1 of this interview, we're going to talk quite a bit about literary fiction. What is literary fiction? How does it differ from genre fiction? So if you've ever been curious about this distinction, Lidija is like your woman. She knows how to describe it really, really well. We talk about the fact that the book is set in her home, which is Croatia. and how much of the politics and things that have happened in her life and what drove her to write that story and how that worked out. We also talk about her takeaway and what she wants readers to take away and how the theme and the point of the book differs in literary fiction than it does in genre fiction. Enjoy. Oh my gosh, Lydia, it is so, so exciting to have you here today. It's been a while.
I'm so excited to be here. It's such a joy to see you again.
Yeah, we were just talking before we started the recording that I think it's been a couple of years, but we started our coaching career together and all these things. And so when this book came out, it's so excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you for coming with us today.
I'm super excited to be here.
So Slanting Towards the Sea, and we'll put some screenshots up of the two beautiful covers that you have, and Lydia has them up behind her as we're recording. You guys can't see this, but they're absolutely gorgeous. I'm happy with the covers.
I'm super, super happy with the covers. The painting cover was actually something that I had sent to my editor, which you're published authors.
Wow.
That you never covers, but this painting popped up on my Instagram basically, and so I was like, this is my cover. And so the US cover, and it turned out to be a person living in Lisbon, but when I looked her up, she turned out to be Croatian as well. So it was a nice way,
perfect,
to connect over. Like we're two Croatian women basically establishing our careers abroad. So it was a great thing. And the UK cover is also, it's kind of like, it's a photograph, but still in a conversation with the US cover because it's also a woman in the sea. So yeah, I love them both. I can't really decide.
I'm a swimmer and I grew up on the ocean in Canada, as you know. And so I don't live on the ocean now. And so it's a really special place for me whenever I can get to the ocean several times per year. In fact, I was in Lisbon a few months back and was in the sea in the spring, and people were like, it's cold. I'm like, I don't care. So yeah, those covers really spoke to me. And I didn't even know that story. That is such a beautiful story. Okay. So Slanting Towards the Sea, it's literary fiction, right? And one of the things that Lydia does an amazing way, we have a lot of writers on this podcast that listen to this podcast, and something that Lydia does so well is describe genre. So what makes it, and this is sort of one of your superpowers, you have so many, and I'm going to talk about that too, but what makes a book literary fiction?
Oh, that's a great question, and thank you.
I know, right?
Glad. I hope I live up to them. Explaining this, but yeah, genre is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I was, as a coach and also as a writer, really annoyed with not getting that answer anywhere. So I took to finding the answer to that question, even though it's always so difficult to answer. But most resources that I perused at that time really spoke about literary fiction just being gorgeous writing, which doing a disservice to genre fiction, because genre fiction can also be gorgeously written, and literary fiction has a different quality to the writing. Not to say that it's more quality, like I said, it's just like that it's different. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I do have this book club for writers that I run. And in this book club, we read a lot of literary fiction. And so I was looking at all these stories and racking my brain in trying to figure out what it was. And so it really is something that Donald Mass, who is this writing instructor that I really adore, really coined this phrase postcards. And he was talking about how literary fiction was written differently than genre fiction in the sense of scenes, where in genre fiction, you will have a scene that moves the story forward. Something changes for the protagonist. Something happens plot-wise and it inspires a decision or a different course of action or a realization for the protagonist. And in literary fiction, those kinds of scenes, but also postcards. And postcards are these scenes where nothing changes for the protagonist, but the understanding of the reader changes when they read the scene. So everything stays the same for the protagonist, but your understanding as a reader deepens. And that's one of the big discerning things. And the other ones are obviously, that it can be structured differently. It doesn't necessarily adhere to the formulas that are in place for some genre fiction. Like in a mystery,
like romance or mystery.
People would be really displeased if you didn't solve the murder toward the beginning, Or in romance, if it's not a happy ending or, at least happy for now, readers get really mad because they have expectations from those stories. Whereas in literary fiction, you really subvert those expectations. And it's also about just having a different approach to the point where it's not so clear cut as it is oftentimes in genre fiction. For instance, in women's fiction, you will often be pretty explicit about the problem that the protagonist has. In Save the Cat Method, there's even this device that's the sidekick in the story really tells the protagonist in the first few scenes what their problem is, and the protagonist kind of denies it. And toward the end of the story, it turns out to be their problem, and they're resolving this issue. But in literary fiction, you do a layered approach to themes and to point of the story. And it's often like when we talk in my book club about literary fiction books, it's really hard to just have one takeaway of the story, to just say, okay, this story, the point of this story is so and so. It's really like every reader gets their own, they pick and choose, and it's all true. It's all true. But it's not just one thing. And the reader usually has to work in literary fiction. They have to work much harder to parse things out, to really figure out the story. And this really puts a lot more pressure on the writer because they have to have, as they're writing, an incredible amount of control over their storytelling. So while you're reading, it might seem that it's disjointed or that it's not like you don't know why the writer has gone that way or this way, but you trust them to lead you to connect all the dots for you. And as a reader, you trust them. And as a writer, you have to deliver on that premise, which is incredibly hard because, when you're in the thick of the writing process, it asks for incredible understanding of your story, which is not yet known to you. So it does ask a little bit more concentration on your part. And as a book coach, obviously, it also asks, this balance between just asking the writer to clarify and, letting them run away with the story, but reining them in. So it's a whole thing. I know I talked a little bit more.
No, that's great. In
broadly.
fact, the listeners are going to understand immediately why you and I get along so well and why we have so many conversations, because this is what I do. I coach mostly genre fiction. And so we have those discussions, right? Because many writers coming at it will be inspired by literary fiction. But as you said, it's very difficult it's difficult to write everything, but it's a little bit less approachable to become, your debut novel as a literary novel. It's pretty tricky. You got to learn a lot before you can do it. And so they take some of those concepts, like those you were talking about Donald J. Mass's idea of postcards, but it's those untethered scenes, right? Like scenes that aren't in a moment. We don't really allow those in genre fiction because they're too abstract and they're too difficult. But literary fiction readers crave those scenes, and that's part of that moment. And so I often have genre fiction writers come to me with a science fiction, for example, with these untethered scenes where you're in somebody's thoughts and they're not grounded in a moment. They don't work, right, in that genre. But in literary fiction, that is actually the staple of it. I mean, and in this book, you do so many things well, Lydia, by the way. It is absolutely, you talked about gorgeous writing as the definition of literary fiction, and that is absolutely what comes to mind. This is really gorgeous book, and you float in and out of those sort of postcards with real details. And I'm going to talk about this in a moment because the showing details that you've got in here are off the charts. I mean, I geek out. The whole podcast is called Show Don't Tell Writing, and that's my shtick, right? And so I was just my mind was exploding with all the details that you had on the page. And so it is Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. I love, love, love the way that you approach things. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but because of your former career and all the shifts that have been made, you looked at these genres in terms of like literary fiction, in terms of patterns, and tried to break it down. So would you say in Slanting Towards the Sea, do you think that you followed the typical or trope patterns? I mean, there's less of them. There's not a formula. Or did you break some of those norms? Like, would you say that this is classic literary fiction, or were you pushing the boundaries?
So I think it's really hard to say that that anything is classic literary fiction because its definition is to defy expectation.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say. But I will say that my first, you did a fantastic job clarifying how difficult it is to write a novel as a beginner writer and to make those postcards work. And this is what happened to me as a novice writer 5 or 6 years ago when I was writing my first novel. I, came to my developmental editor with a flurry of those unfettered scenes, and she asked me to ground them all. And she led me she led the book towards women's fiction. Yeah, towards genre. And while at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I was new to writing. I didn't know anything. So it made sense for me to listen to her. It ended up, my book ended up being something that I didn't want, and it didn't work out. And so I shelved that project. But I'm mentioning this because you really do have to learn the formulas. You really do have to learn show don't tell so well that you can.
Yes, I didn't make her say this.
She didn't. Yeah, it's like you really do need to learn all those things, and then you can take them and start playing with them. And I will say that when I started writing this book, I knew I wanted it to be a literary fiction novel, but I was also mired basically like, as a book coach, I'm trained in different forms of different story pattern. Let's say, Save the Cat, Blueprint for a Book, Story Genius.
I know you follow Story
Genius. All those things. And they tend, because they're teaching you something, they tend toward formulaic, right? They need to show you some formula to be able to execute that. And so I had to fight back on that impulse to fit the story into this formula. And I was actually on a call with Barbara Boyd, who is our colleague, and you know her well.
Yes.
And I chose Barbara because Barbara, she coaches nonfiction on the whole, but also literary fiction is one of the things that she loves, and she hates women's fiction. And I thought this was a perfect thing for me because I thought she would pick up on the things where I veered towards women's fiction, towards genre fiction. And so we had this call, and she said, I laid out the story for her that I had in mind. And this was before I really in earnest started writing. And she said, there was this thing where toward the end that I really leaning into the women's fiction angle. I basically killed off a character so that I would make things easier for my protagonist. And she said, what would happen if that person didn't die? And I'm like, it would be super messy. And she said, yeah, that's where it is. And she was so right. She was so right in learning how to curb those impulses that you are learning as a genre writer to honor. It's like fighting those impulses as a literary writer where the story really resides. But to be able to do that, you really, really do need to know the ins and outs of your basic genre, because even like you said, even literary fiction does have basis of the story in a genre. You do have a sci-fi bent to a lot of literary fiction stories. You have Orbital by Samantha Harvey that won, I think, the Booker Prize. So it's set in space. So it's basically
it crosses topics for sure.
Yeah,
you can do any topic in literary fiction, but it is a style of writing. But it's not for everybody, and it's not for every reader. Right. And so you're going to pick up different readers than you will if you were writing in that genre.
And
So
generally less of them. Fewer.
Yeah.
Fewer.
Yeah.
Fewer. Yeah.
Fewer readers. And I like to say too, depending on what people's goals are with their book, because there is so much to learn in literary fiction, it's not for everybody, right? Like you have to be really, really interested in learning about all of that, right? To be able to make it work. Okay, so what's this book about?
So this book is about 38-year-old Croatian woman living in Croatia, and I'm from Croatia. But it's about a 38-year-old Croatian woman who's divorced, living with her ailing father. And she divorced the love of her life 10 years ago for reasons that only she and her mother-in-law know. And she's still in contact and in close relationship with her ex-husband and his new wife. But when a new man enters her life, the carefully curated dynamics between all involved really erupt.
Talk about messy, right? Talk
Yes.
about messy. So yeah, the book is set in your home, Croatia, which I just think is absolutely beautiful. And there are beautiful descriptions of the sites. And I know that you also have like sort of a photo guide on your website of all the different sites in case people haven't been there. And I've never been to Croatia. It's been on my list for a very long time. I will make it there. But my husband's already been. So it's one of those things where like when we look, he's like, I've been there. I want to go somewhere new. But we will get there. But you also chose to tackle pieces of the politics of living in Croatia and the ways that it's changed over the years is something that I've seen you write about in relation to this book. It isn't necessarily all in the book. It's not what the book is about. But was that one of the things that you really wanted to show, or did that just kind of happen? Like what it was like to live in an evolving country as it's changing.
To be honest, like my first book, I really didn't want Croatia to be a part of it, so much so that I set it in the US, even though I've never been to the US. But it felt at the time, and this was like 2017, 2018, that if I set the book in Croatia, everyone would expect, there's this expectation that reader has of stories coming from a certain place if the place isn't the US or the UK. If you're in the US or the UK, you can write whatever story. You can write the trailer park story, you can write the Manhattan story, like everything goes. If you're from Croatia, everyone expects you to write about the war. And if I had a dime for every time that I heard, oh, would you write a book about a war? It's really interesting. I would be a rich person now. And this wasn't something that I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about intimate relationships and how they develop and small things that really change our lives. And it felt like if I put the story in Croatia, the Croatian element, like the culture that's similar, but not so much so from the US or Canada, in fact, would, overpower the quiet narrative. And so I set my first book in the US, and it was a huge mistake because I'm a very sensory orientated person, and it was really hard to bring the setting to life because I'd never been there. And so when I started this book, I said, I'm going to set it in Croatia. It's not an option. Like, I'm not going to put myself through that torture again. And my initial thoughts were that I wouldn't want to involve Croatia too much. Okay, the story is set here, but let's keep it out on the sidelines as much as possible. But then when I delved into this character's life, it became obvious pretty early on just how much she was affected by this country that she calls home, as we all are, regardless of where we live. It's like we're all shaped by what's possible in our country, what education we can get, what kind of, occupation you can have, what kind of money you can earn, what your healthcare system like. All those things really govern your life. And it was very true for my character as well. And so slowly, these two opposite things really seeped into my book. First was the gorgeous setting, which I said, I'm a sensory person. I do experience my surroundings in the way that they're described in the book. I do go out and I do notice all the sounds and the smells and the spray of the sea every day. Like, it's all there for me every day. So it was not a thing I did to enhance the book. It's just how things are.
No, not at all.
Yeah. in the other competing part was the political stuff, because it also shaped my life. And so it was only logical for it to enter the book as well. So those two things are.
Yeah, and it isn't as overt. It isn't as, there aren't that many things about the political piece. Like I was expecting there to be more, honestly, when I read some of the preamble about it. And of course, that's what people draw out, right? But I think it was actually really interesting just on a sort of more personal note, because everything that ends up in a book is personal. It doesn't mean that it's been your experience, but it might have been the opposite of your experience, or it might have been, all these things. And I'm sure this is not your story, because I know that is not your situation. But I actually love, there was a few details about when she's setting up her business and all the paperwork. I'm like, you don't have enough experience to become a sole proprietor or entrepreneur. Like, because when you and I were setting up our business, that was something that you went through, right? And so that was, I know you had so much more paperwork and so many more hoops to jump through to set up your own business than I did in Canada. And so that was really neat to see that show up in the book, because we forget it's not just about culture and politics. It's like actually how it affects your life. And like you said, what kinds of jobs are available to you and what are you allowed to do and what opportunities are there is very different from country to country. And I know people often will say, how come there's so many writers in Canada? And our social safety net is one of those reasons, because we can, we don't need to worry about healthcare from an employer standpoint. So we do have more sole proprietors because we don't have that worry. Like there's different things and policies that actually do shape our lives. And I love how you do that. Yes, you didn't set it in Croatia because it was like a gimmick. I mean, that's where you live. And it's not about the war or about politics. It's just kind of there. Of course, people are people and relationships are relationships. And seeing that is really awesome. You don't have to write about Croatia specifically to show that Croatian people have the same things and family dynamics and relationship dynamics that all humans have. So what do you hope that readers will take away from the story? I know we talked about this at the beginning. You're like, oh, there's not just one takeaway or point or theme, but in your heart of hearts, what do you want readers to take away from it? Or is that too much of a spoiler?
No, I don't think it's a spoiler. Thank you. That's a really good question. And probably, just like I said, for different readers interpreting the book differently, you could ask me this question 10 days in a row and I'd probably give a different answer. I think that when I was writing it, there were a few things that I really leaned into that were important to me. One was how we are shaped as people with some experiences, whether they're one traumatic event or if they're like prolonged period of unsafety and instability, which in Croatia has been historically a thing, and how that can affect your decision making. And it makes you feel like you're making all these decisions out of free will, but that free will is shaped by your emotional setup, if that makes sense. So questioning that setup is what I'm interested in my personal life. Like I enjoy doing stuff, just based on inertia, and then just realizing that, and then giving it a proper thought and saying, do I want this to be my reaction going forward? And just the idea of people having the ability to change and having the ability to do things differently, but also that there are things that are going to be, that your life is going to be affected by. And it's this, push and pull. It's positive and it's also heartbreaking at the same time, if that makes sense.
So that's what makes perfect sense. And I love that you say that, because again, just following your journey, you've made some hard choices in your life, and we've talked about this before, but you were a lawyer turned writer. And that was one of the things that we got along most about. I'm fascinated by people who switch careers, myself included, from being a business executive to becoming a book coach and a writer. And so how did that switch happen for you? We have a lot of listeners that are in other careers now and would love to do what you did. So how did it happen?
it was a bit of a crazy journey, I will say. In Croatia, attorneys, I was an attorney at law. I had my own law practice. But in Croatia, people, even if you're in the most like progressive, like high level occupation, you don't necessarily earn a lot of money. Like
Government position, more or less, right? Like,
yes, it's not a government position. It's just the fact that people, for instance, yeah, government positions generally poorly paid. So a neurosurgeon in a hospital will not earn maybe twice of what the retail worker does. It's just like not enough money for that kind of occupation. And I was, self-employed through my law practice. And like I was a business owner. But there's hyperinflation of lawyers in Croatia. When I opened my law office, until the time that I closed it, there was a rise of 30% more people being lawyers, practicing law before courts. And it's unsustainable. And because of that, the prices, the rates, you have to dump the prices. Anyway, it was a whole thing. It was not very lucrative, just as any occupation in Croatia is not very lucrative. So people here live off of tourism and great economy and all those things, not so much off of a wage. And so my husband and I, we were actually thinking about moving away. And he's lucky in that his occupation translates well into a foreign country, which he's a programmer. While I'm a Croatian lawyer, so my wouldn't translate so nicely. And he ended up finding a remote job, and we ended up staying in Croatia. But then by that time, I was just like so sick of my job that I just wanted to do something with books, because I had, like, during the time that we thought of leaving Croatia, I was just like, what will I do if we go to Ireland? Like, what's going to be my life there? And I decided that it's going to be something about books. I'm either going to be a bookseller or a book writer or a, librarian, something about books.
You were being called, yeah.
Yes,
And it's hard.
And it was not more well defined than that. And that's what makes the story a little bit crazy, because when he came home and said, we're staying in Croatia, I was like, yeah, great. We don't have to uproot our children, take them to a country where they don't even know to speak their language. But on the other hand, I couldn't reconcile myself to going back to law after admitting all the things that I hated about it. And so I said to my husband, he was finally earning enough to keep me afloat, to give me a chance to really do something. And so I took a leap of faith. It's more like jumping out of an airplane. There was no safety net. There was no guarantees. I didn't know anything about writing. I didn't know show, don't tell.
You could have found this podcast and learned a ton from people. Now you're teaching it.
I wish, yes, now I'm teaching it. And it was a steep learning curve, but back in, it was 6 years ago, in February 2019, I closed down my law firm. I started connecting with critique partners abroad, reading and writing in English, which up until that point, I was reading and writing in Croatian. And so maybe 9 or 10 months out, I found out about Author Accelerator. And Jenny, I was so worried that I would not be accepted into the fold, being, someone who's not a native speaker. But thankfully, Jenny accepted me, and it's critique of other people's work.
And she's shouting about your book at the top of her lungs. Can you even imagine? Right? Like, you think about that 6 years ago, that you work that closely with her, that she's excited about this book, as excited as you are. And conversely, to 30% extra attorneys practicing law, you were the very first Author Accelerator certified coach in Croatia. Are you still? I don't know if that's still true.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
So,
yeah.
I mean, from a overrun profession to being the only one in your country that actually can do this job, like, think about that, right? Like,
I never did throw it that way. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And you talk about you were reading and writing in Croatian, and then you switched to English. How was that? And I say that because I work with a lot of ESL, or even like English as a second language, or I'm working with a writer who English is her fifth language. I'm working with a writer who English is his seventh language. And he said, he's choosing to write in English because it's his language of inspiration. So I hope you're listening out there. what was that decision about, and how difficult was that? Do you speak other languages or the two?
Just just Croatian and English, yeah.
Okay. And so how was that transition to be writing in a language that isn't your first language?
Croatia is such a small country. We actually have less than 4 million people. So you can imagine our publishing landscape not being huge and our readership not being huge. And people don't live off of writing here usually. Probably there are exceptions, but not many of them. So when I finished the first draft of my first novel, I really started thinking about, okay, can I publish this? And where do I publish this? And it was unimaginable for me to publish it in Croatia because, like I said, it's not, there was this fear of glass ceilings, which I also met as an attorney, and I didn't want that to be part of my story. I wanted to be judged by my talent alone. So I decided to translate my book, or I'd given it to someone who had used Google Translate, rendering the material completely unusable, which put me in a position, it was horrible. And it put me in a position where I needed to do it myself or give up. And so at that point, I really thought I was so far into this process that it didn't make sense to give up. I didn't know how much work it goes from translating your book and writing what was basically the first draft to getting it ready for publication. And thank God I didn't know, because if I had, I would say that. Yeah, please don't look into it a lot. Please before. Yeah. But anyway, I did that. I translated it, and it was difficult at first while I had the two languages in my head, because I was trying to literally translate and it didn't work. I know there are translators out there who do a fantastic job. It's an art form in its own right, but I personally had issues with translating because
it's the same thing. For those who don't speak two languages, there's lots of ways that we use language that you can't literally translate, because you have to think about what it means in that culture, in that language, right? And so that's not a skill that everybody has.
So for instance, there's this example where I bristle at this now.
Very good showing detail there. You've been showing and not telling the bristling, right? Good job.
Yeah, I'm bristling. So selling waterfront property is a thing here, and we call it like the house is in the first row to the sea, right? And so in Croatian, it makes sense when you say it, like the house is the first row to the sea. In English, it doesn't work so well. A seafront property, and that's how you should say it. So if I translate the phrase literally, it really doesn't work. And then that's just a phrase, and a lot more goes into translating entire paragraphs and entire chapters that meets the eye in the beginning. So I basically gave up on translating and started thinking.
So this book you started in English?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And the English is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Okay,
thank you.
How can we find your books? And talk a little bit about your book coaching service, because the clients who get to work with you, especially in the genres that you excel in, literary fiction, women's fiction, they are so, so lucky. Where can we find you?
So my book is, everywhere where the books are sold. So, in Canada and in the US, it's in all the stores. You can find it everywhere. And it's also out in the UK, so you can get it there. And in terms of book coaching, I'm taking a pause because
launching, we didn't even talk about that. You'll have to come back on and talk about launching a book.
Yeah. Launching a book is a full-time job. It takes a lot, and I really do. I'm really a very dedicated coach. I really I do want to give 100% to my clients, and this wasn't a period where I could do it. So I'm taking a short break, but I'll be back in the fall, and you can contact me via my website.
We'll put all the links there.
Yeah,
and fall 2025. So depending on if you're listening to this later, then Lidija might just be your ideal book coach. So go and check her out.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming on today, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast to be here. I love this.
Thanks for tuning in to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Suzy Vidori. Help me continue to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or planning to write. Please consider subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Also visit suzyvidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly Inspired Writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about upcoming training, events, and writing courses that happen in my community. If you're feeling brave, check the show notes and send us a page of your writing that isn't quite where you want it to be yet for our Show Don't Tell page review episodes. Remember, that book and your writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make it the absolute best. If you're feeling called to write that book, keep going, and I'm going to be right here cheering you on. See you again next week.